Well, it's Mr. Gowerluck again, and I'd like to read to you one more story of your favorite type of story. It is a fairy tale called The Princess and the Pea. It was written by Hans Christian Andersen and Ms. Barrett and retold by Melanie from our class. There once was a prince, a lonely prince. He traveled around the world to find someone like himself, a proper princess to share his life. But this he knew, she must be a real princess. In his travels, he found many princesses. Each claimed to be a real princess. Each had the proper pedigree and credentials, but there was always something that was wrong. At last, the prince returned home, and he was pretty sad. He wanted a princess so badly, and now he feared that his expectations might never be met. The old king and queen welcomed him home. Well, another summer passed, and the leaves were falling from the trees when, one evening, a terrible storm blew in from the sea. As the prince sat by the fire reading, lightning drew closer and closer, and thunder rattled the windows. It seemed like they would break. Hours into the night, the storm raged, and at midnight, a calm fell as suddenly as the storm itself had arrived. An eerie knock was heard at the town gate. Now, back in those days, towns had a wall or a gate around them for protection. And so a knock was heard at the town gate. It was a gentle but insistent knock. The townspeople and courtiers rubbed their eyes and wondered who could be out at such a time like this and during a storm. The old king himself sent an advisor to check out what was going on at the gate. There stood a princess, but she was in a terrible state. Rain was pouring from her hair. She claimed she was a princess, but there was rain and water all over her, overflowing her shoes, and it ran out her heels. An advisor, all alone, laughed out loud, but she swore that she was a real princess. Well, we are going to see soon enough if that's true, whispered the old queen, being careful not to reveal her secret plan. The princess was given a warm dinner and some dry clothes, while the old queen set off to prepare a sleeping chamber for the princess. First, she stripped off all the bedding, and she placed a single pea in the center of the bedstand. Next, she called for 20 mattresses and piled them up, one on top of another, all on top of that pea. And finally, 20 feather beds were added to the top of those 20 mattresses. The princess's sleeping arrangements were made. In the morning, the old king and queen met the princess when she got up. If possible, she looked worse than when she had even arrived. And they asked how she slept, and she said, "Oh, terribly. And I closed my eyes all night. I don't know what was the deal with that bed. It was as if I was laying on some really hard pebble. My whole body is black and blue this morning. It's truly terrible." And the princess started crying. The old queen saw at once that she must be a real princess. Only a real princess could have felt a pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. I don't know the connection here, but there's some weird connection. Wouldn't you think the pea would be like squished? So the prince asked her to be his wife. Oh, that makes logical sense. Sure that he'd found a real princess. The prince once again traveled the world, this time with his princess, and they both were happy. And the pea, well, it was put in a museum where it still can be found today. That is, if no one has stolen it. This is a true story. Isn't that crazy? I like this version better from one of my favorite stories called The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales. I like this one better. But if you like that one, that's okay. But here's my story. It's called The Princess and the Bowling Ball. Once upon a time, there was a prince. And this prince's dad and mom, or the king and the queen, somehow got it into their royal heads that no princess would be good enough for their boy unless she could feel a pea through 100 mattresses. So it should come as no surprise that the prince had a very hard time finding a princess. Every time he'd meet a nice girl, his mom and dad would pile up 100 mattresses on top of a pea, and they'd invite her to sleep over. When the princess came down for breakfast, the queen would ask, "How did you sleep, dear?" Oh, I'm sorry. Greta's going to be the queen on this one. "How did you sleep, dear?" And the princess would politely say, "Fine, thank you." And the king would show her the door. She'd be gone. Now, this went on for 3 years. And of course, nobody ever felt that pee under 100 mattresses. Then one day, the prince met the girl of his dreams. He decided he had to do something about it. That night, before the princess went to bed, the prince slipped a bowling ball under 100 mattresses. By the way, look at that ladder. Aren't those wonderful mattresses? And she's so pretty. When the princess came down for breakfast the next morning, the queen asked, "How did you sleep, dear?" "This might sound odd," said the princess, "but I think you need another mattress. I felt like I was sleeping on a lump as big as a bowling ball." "That's good enough for me." The king and queen were satisfied. The prince and princess were married, and everyone lived happily ever after, but maybe not completely honestly ever after.